The gold band caught the harsh afternoon sunlight as Clara Brennan's trembling fingers placed it on the weathered counter of McGilvrey's general store, and she felt as though she were laying down her own beating heart alongside it. "Please, Mr. McGilvrey," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation she could no longer hide. "It is all I have left of her, but my brothers need to eat." The shopkeeper, a portly man with thin spectacles perched on his bulbous nose, picked up the delicate ring and examined it with the cold calculation of someone who had seen too many desperate souls pass through his doors in Redemption Springs, Texas, this brutal summer of 1878. The drought had strangled the life from the land, turning the once fertile soil to dust and driving families to the edge of starvation or exodus. "It is a fine piece," McGilvrey said slowly, turning the ring so the small ruby embedded in the gold caught the light. "Your mother had good taste, Miss Brennan. I can give you 2 sacks of flour, some beans, and a bit of salted pork for it." Clara closed her eyes, fighting back tears that would shame her. She was 22 years old, and in the 6 months since her mother had died from fever, she had become both mother and father to her 2 younger brothers, Sam and Daniel, aged 14 and 11. Their father had perished 3 years prior in a cattle drive gone wrong, trampled under a stampede, and they had been scraping by ever since on the small plot of land he had left them. But this drought had broken them entirely. The well had run dry. The vegetable garden had withered. The 3 chickens they owned had stopped laying eggs a month ago. "That ring belonged to her mother, and her mother before that," Clara said, opening her eyes to meet McGilvrey's impassive gaze. "It came all the way from Ireland with my great-grandmother in 1803. "That may be so," McGilvrey replied, "but sentiment does not change the value of gold and stone. 2 sacks of flour, beans, and pork, that is my offer." Clara felt her heart splinter. She had promised her mother, in those final fevered hours, that she would keep the ring safe, pass it down just as it had been passed down through generations of women who had loved and suffered and endured. But what good was a promise to the dead when the living were starving? "I will take it," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Now hold on just a minute." The voice came from behind her, deep and smooth as aged whiskey, with a drawl that spoke of long trails and open skies. Clara turned to find a man standing in the doorway of the shop, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the ends where it brushed his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of blue-green, like the surface of a deep river, and they were fixed on the ring in McGilvrey's hand with an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed as he stepped fully into the shop. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the revolver well-maintained but not flashy. Everything about him spoke of capability and hard-earned experience. "This is a private transaction, stranger," McGilvrey said with a hint of irritation. "I will thank you not to interfere." The cowboy moved closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, his spurs chiming softly with each step. He could not have been much older than Clara herself, perhaps 25 or 26, but his weathered face suggested he had lived more life in those years than most men did in 50. "How much for the ring?" he asked McGilvrey, his eyes never leaving the delicate piece of jewelry. "It is not for sale to you," McGilvrey said. "I have already made an arrangement with Miss Brennan here." "I have not accepted yet," Clara interjected, surprised by her own boldness. Something about this stranger's presence had steadied her, though she could not say why. The cowboy's eyes shifted to her then, and Clara felt the full weight of his attention. His gaze was not leering or dismissive, as so many men's were when they looked at women. Instead, he seemed to truly see her. The proud set of her shoulders despite her worn calico dress, the strength in her face despite the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the determination that had kept her upright through 6 months of hell. "What were you offering for it?" he asked McGilvrey. 2 sacks of flour, beans, and salted pork, the shopkeeper replied with clear reluctance. The cowboy nodded slowly, then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Clara watched, confused, as he counted out bills onto the counter. "I will give you $30 for that ring," he said. The shop went silent. $30 was more money than Clara had seen in a year. It was more than her father had earned in a good month. McGilvrey's eyes widened with undisguised greed. "Sold," the shopkeeper said quickly, snatching up the bills before the cowboy could change his mind. "Wait," Clara said, panic rising in her chest. This was wrong somehow, though she could not articulate why. The stranger had just paid far more than the ring was worth, certainly more than McGilvrey would have given her in trade goods, but now the ring would be gone forever, claimed by a man whose name she did not even know. The cowboy took the ring from McGilvrey's outstretched hand and turned to Clara. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and she saw something flicker in those river-colored eyes. Recognition, perhaps, though they had never met. Understanding, as if he could read the story of her suffering written in the lines of her face. Then he did something that would change the course of Clara Brennan's life forever. He held out the ring to her. "This belongs to you," he said simply. Clara stared at the ring, then at his face, then back at the ring. "I do not understand," she whispered. "You were selling it because you needed supplies for your family," he said. "That is clear enough. But a family heirloom should not be lost to desperation." He pressed the ring into her hand, closing her fingers around it. His hands were calloused and warm, and Clara felt a shock run through her at the contact. "Take it. It is yours." "But you just paid $30, she said, her mind reeling. "I cannot accept charity." "It is not charity," he said. "Call it an investment." "In what?" "In the kind of woman who would sacrifice something precious for those she loves," he said. "The world needs more of that, not less." Clara felt tears spill over despite her best efforts to contain them. She clutched the ring to her chest, feeling its familiar weight, the warmth of her mother's presence seeming to emanate from the metal. "I do not even know your name," she said. "Jacob Thorne?" he said, a slight smile touching his lips. "Late of the Bar None Ranch in Colorado, currently riding the grub line looking for work." "Clara Brennan," she managed. "Of the failing farm outside of town." "Miss Brennan," McGilvrey interrupted, irritation clear in his voice. "Do you still require supplies, or was this all simply theater?" Clara looked down at the ring in her hand, then back at Jacob Thorne, whose expression had gone cold as he turned to face the shopkeeper. "You will load up 4 sacks of flour, a full side of salted pork, 2 sacks of beans, a sack of cornmeal, coffee, sugar, and whatever fresh vegetables you have in stock," Jacob said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I will need payment," McGilvrey said. Jacob placed more bills on the counter. "This should cover it. Have it ready in 15 minutes and load it onto whatever wagon or cart Miss Brennan has outside." "I walked here," Clara said quietly. "I do not have a wagon. I was only going to carry what I could." Jacob's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Clara sensed anger there, but not directed at her. At the situation, perhaps. At a world that would let a young woman walk miles in the brutal Texas heat to beg for food. "Then we will take my horse," Jacob said. "He is strong enough to carry the supplies. I will walk with you to make sure you get home safely." "Sir, I cannot possibly accept," Clara began. But Jacob raised a hand. "Those boys need to eat," he said, "and you need to not collapse from exhaustion before you can feed them. This is not negotiable." There was something in his tone that reminded Clara of her father, firm but kind, the voice of a man who was accustomed to making decisions and seeing them through, but who made those decisions from a place of genuine care. She found she did not have the strength to argue, and perhaps more truthfully, she did not want to. For 6 months she had carried the weight of her family's survival alone. The relief of sharing that burden, even for a moment, even with a stranger, was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate but sincere. "I will find a way to repay you." "You already have," Jacob said. so quietly she almost missed it. While McGilvrey grudgingly assembled the supplies, muttering under his breath about interfering strangers and foolish charity, Jacob led Clara outside into the blazing afternoon sun. Main Street of Redemption Springs was nearly deserted in the heat, the few people visible moving slowly between patches of shade. The town had the worn, desperate look of a place hanging on by its fingernails. Many of the shops had closed, their owners either moving on to greener pastures or succumbing to the same poverty that afflicted everyone else. Jacob's horse was a magnificent chestnut gelding with a white blaze on its face, tied to the hitching post outside the general store. The animal nickered softly as Jacob approached, and Clara watched as the cowboy stroked the horse's neck with obvious affection. "This is Copper," Jacob said. "He has carried me through 3 territories and never once complained. Well, except about the quality of grass in New Mexico. He had opinions about that." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "He is beautiful," she said, reaching out tentatively to touch the horse's soft nose. Copper wafted warm air against her palm, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Where are you from originally, Miss Brennan?" Jacob asked, leaning against the hitching post. "Your accent suggests somewhere east of here." "Pennsylvania," Clara said, "a small town outside of Philadelphia. My father came west for opportunity in 1867, convinced we would make our fortune in cattle. My mother followed because she loved him, even though it broke her heart to leave her family." She paused, remembering her mother's tears during those first hard years, the way she would hold this very ring and whisper prayers in the Irish Gaelic her own mother had taught her. "What about you, Mr. Thorne? Where is home for you?" "Jacob, please," he said. "Mr. Thorne was my father, and we did not get along." He gazed down the dusty street, his eyes distant. "I am from Missouri originally. Small farm, too many mouths to feed. I left at 16 to make my own way, figured I would send money back to help. By the time I had money to send, word reached me that they had all moved to Oregon. I have been drifting ever since, I suppose. Going where the work is, seeing what there is to see." "That sounds lonely," Clara said softly. Jacob looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding born of shared solitude. "It has been," he admitted, "but a man gets used to his own company, learns to find contentment in a good horse, a clear sky, and honest work." "And what brings you to Redemption Springs, Cease?" Clara asked. "There's not much work to be found here. The drought has destroyed everything." "Heard there was a ranch about 20 miles north looking for hands to help drive what is left of their herd to market," Jacob said. "The Rocking Horse outfit, you know it?" Clara nodded. "I know of it. Mr. Hutchinson owns it. He is a hard man, but fair from what I have heard. Lost most of his cattle to the drought like everyone else." "Well, I figured it was worth the ride to ask," Jacob said. "I am good with horses and cattle. I can ride, rope, and shoot straight. That ought to count for something." Before Clara could respond, McGilvrey emerged from the shop, his face red from exertion, struggling with a heavy sack of flour. Behind him, his young clerk carried another sack. Jacob immediately moved to help, taking both sacks with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. Clara watched as he loaded the supplies onto Copper's back, distributing the weight carefully so the horse would not be overburdened. The animal stood patient and still, clearly accustomed to carrying loads. When everything was secured, Jacob took Copper's reins and gestured down the street. "Lead the way, Miss Brennan." The walk to the Brennan homestead took just over an hour, following a dusty road that wound through increasingly desolate countryside. The land here had once been green, Clara told Jacob as they walked. There had been wildflowers in the spring, and the creek that ran near their property had been full of clear, cold water. Now everything was brown and brittle, the creek reduced to a series of stagnant puddles, the wildflowers long since burned away by the merciless sun. But as they walked, Clara found herself talking about more than just the drought. There was something about Jacob's quiet, attentive presence that drew out stories she had not shared in months. She told him about her father's dream of building a successful ranch, about his infectious optimism and the way he could make her mother laugh even in the hardest times. She spoke of her mother's strength, how she had taken the rough materials of their frontier life and woven them into something resembling civilization, teaching Clara and her brothers to read and write, insisting on grace even when they were eating beans from tin plates. Jacob listened without interrupting, occasionally asking a question that showed he was truly paying attention. In turn, he shared his own stories, close calls with stampeding cattle, nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, towns full of characters both dangerous and kind. He spoke of the vast beauty of the Western territories, the way the land could break a man, but also make him into something stronger than he had ever imagined possible. "You love it out here," Clara observed. "For all the hardship, you truly love this life." Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering. "I suppose I do," he said finally. "There is a freedom in it that I never found anywhere else, but freedom has a price. It means being alone more often than not. It means no roots, no real home." He glanced at her, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Sometimes I wonder if the price is too high." Before Clara could puzzle out what he meant, two figures appeared on the road ahead, running toward them. Clara recognized her brothers immediately, Sam, tall and gangly, all elbows and knees and wild dark hair, and Daniel, smaller and rounder, his face sunburned and worried. "Clara!" Sam called out. "We were worried! You have been gone for hours!" The boys skidded to a stop when they saw Jacob, their eyes widening at the sight of the tall stranger leading a horse laden with supplies. Daniel instinctively moved closer to Clara, his hand gripping her skirt in a gesture she remembered from when he was much younger. "It is all right," Clara said, putting a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Sam, Daniel, this is Mr. Jacob Thorne. He is a cowboy passing through town, and he very kindly helped me with the supplies. Jacob, these are my brothers." "Pleased to meet you both," Jacob said, his voice warm. He did not talk down to them as many adults did with children, Clara noticed. He spoke to them as though they were simply shorter versions of men deserving of respect. Sam was eyeing the supplies on Copper's back with barely contained excitement. "Is that coffee?" he asked. "Real coffee?" "It is," Jacob confirmed. "And flour, pork, beans, cornmeal, and some other essentials." "How did you pay for all that?" Sam asked Clara. Then his eyes went to her hand, where the ring glinted on her finger where she had slipped it for safekeeping. His face fell. "Oh, Clara, you did not—" "I was going to," Clara said softly, "but Mr. Thorne bought it from the shopkeeper and gave it back to me, and he purchased the supplies as well." Sam's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, suspicion. "Why would you do that?" he asked Jacob directly, his voice harder than his 14 years should allow. But Clara understood. Sam had become the man of the family when their father died, or had tried to, and he had learned to be suspicious of kindness that came without clear motive. "Because your sister needed help, and I was in a position to provide it," Jacob said simply. "No strings attached, son, just one person helping another." "We are not a charity case," Sam said, his jaw set stubbornly, and Clara saw her father in him so clearly it hurt. "Sam," she said gently, but Jacob held up a hand. "You are absolutely right," Jacob said to Sam. "You are not a charity case. You are a family that has hit hard times, same as thousands of others in this drought. There is no shame in accepting help when it is offered freely. The shame would be in me having the means to help and choosing not to." Sam stared at Jacob for a long moment, and Clara held her breath. Finally, her brother nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." "Jacob is fine," the cowboy said with a slight smile. The rest of the walk to the homestead was lighter, with Daniel chattering excitedly about all the things they would cook with the supplies, and Sam walking slightly ahead, trying to maintain his dignity as the man of the family but occasionally glancing back at Jacob with poorly concealed curiosity. The Brennan place, when they reached it, was as humble as Clara had intimated. A small wooden cabin with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better days, a dried-up vegetable garden, and a well with a bucket sitting forlorn on its edge. but Clara had kept it as neat as possible, and there were small touches that spoke of care. Wildflowers now dried in a jar by the door. The porch swept clean of dust despite the futility, windows that were cracked but washed. Jacob helped carry the supplies inside, and Clara felt a flush of embarrassment at the sparse interior. There was so little: a table and chairs, a wood stove, 2 beds in the main room for the boys, and a curtained-off area in the corner for Clara's own sleeping space. A few cooking implements, some mismatched dishes, a shelf with a handful of books. But if Jacob judged the poverty of their circumstances, he gave no sign. Instead, he helped Sam and Daniel unload everything, stacking the sacks of flour and cornmeal in the small pantry, hanging the salted pork from a hook in the ceiling, arranging everything with a careful efficiency that spoke of extensive trail experience. When everything was settled, Clara walked Jacob back outside. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Jacob untied Copper and stood for a moment, looking out over the parched land. "It is not much," Clara said, feeling the need to explain, to justify, "but it is ours. My father built this cabin with his own hands. He died believing we could make something of this place." "It is a good place," Jacob said, "a strong foundation. And you have kept it together, kept your family together. That is more than most could do." Clara felt tears threatening again and blinked them back fiercely. She had cried more today than in the past 6 months combined, and she was not sure what to make of that. "Why did you really do this?" she asked us. "The ring, the supplies. You do not know us. We are nothing to you." Jacob was silent for a long time, long enough that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. 5 years ago, I was passing through a town in Kansas. I saw a woman trying to sell her wedding ring to buy medicine for her sick child. I was younger then, poorer, and I told myself it was not my business. I rode on." He paused, his jaw working. "I heard later that the child died. I do not know if it is true, do not know if my $30 would have made a difference, but I have thought about that woman almost every day since, about how I had the chance to help and did not take it." Clara's breath caught. "So this was for her," she said, "to make up for that." "Maybe," Jacob admitted, "or maybe it was for me, to prove that I am not the kind of man who rides past suffering when he can stop it." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt as though he could see straight through to her soul. "Or maybe it was because when I saw you standing in that shop holding that ring like your heart was breaking, I knew I could not walk away from you." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Clara had no name for. Her pulse quickened, and she found herself unable to look away from those river-colored eyes. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "It is the least we can do. I could make biscuits with the new flour, and there are some potatoes left in the cellar that I have been saving." Jacob smiled, and Clara realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his face, making him seem younger, less careworn. "I would like that very much," he said. That evening, as Clara cooked in the small cabin while Jacob sat at the table talking with Sam and Daniel, something shifted in the universe of her life. The boys were animated in a way she had not seen since their mother died, peppering Jacob with questions about cowboy life, about cattle drives and wild horses and gunfights. Jacob answered patiently, sometimes seriously, sometimes with humor that had even Daniel laughing. Clara found herself stealing glances at him as she worked, watching the way the lamplight played across his features, the easy way he interacted with her brothers, the occasional glance he sent her way that made her stomach flutter strangely. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be aware of herself as a woman, not just as a caretaker and provider. But something about Jacob's presence awakened that awareness, made her conscious of the way her dress fit, the loosened strands of hair around her face, the flush in her cheeks from the heat of the stove. The meal was simple but good: biscuits with the fresh flour, fried potatoes, and thin slices of the salted pork. Clara even brewed coffee, a luxury they had not tasted in months. They ate at the small table, crowded together, and Clara could not remember the last time she had heard such easy conversation in this cabin, such laughter. After supper, as the last light faded from the sky, Jacob stood to leave. Sam and Daniel thanked him profusely, and Clara walked him outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling air. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For the ring, the supplies, the company. You gave us more than food today." "You are welcome," Jacob said. He hesitated, then asked, "Would it be all right if I came back? I mean to say, I will be at the Rocking Horse Ranch if Mr. Hutchinson hires me, and that is not far from here. I could check in, make sure you all are doing all right, perhaps help with some of the repairs around the place." He gestured toward the barn. "That roof could use some attention before the rains come, whenever they finally do." Clara's heart leaped. "We would like that," she said, then corrected herself with a smile. "I would like that." Jacob's answering smile was soft and warm. "Then I will see you soon, Clara Brennan." He mounted Copper and rode off into the deepening twilight, and Clara stood on the porch watching until horse and rider disappeared into the darkness. She touched the ring on her finger, feeling its reassuring weight, and allowed herself something she had not indulged in for a very long time: hope. True to his word, Jacob appeared 3 days later, riding up to the Brennan homestead just after dawn. Clara, who had been drawing water from one of the deeper pools in the creek, looked up to see him approaching and felt her heart perform a complicated maneuver in her chest. She was acutely aware that her dress was old and patched, her hair coming loose from its braid, her hands rough and red from the work. But Jacob's face lit up when he saw her, and Clara found she did not care about her appearance quite so much. "You got the job," she said, noting that he carried himself with the satisfied air of an employed man. "I did," Jacob confirmed, dismounting. "Mr. Hutchinson hired me on the spot. Seems most of his hands left when the drought got bad, and he is desperate to get his remaining cattle to market before he loses them too. He is paying decent wages, and the work starts tomorrow." "That is wonderful," Clara said sincerely. "I am happy for you." "I told him I would need Sundays off," Jacob said, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "For church," I said. "He is a religious man." So he could not argue. "We do not have a church in Redemption Springs anymore," Clara said, confused. "The preacher left months ago." "I know," Jacob said, "but Mr. Hutchinson does not need to know that my Sunday devotion will take the form of repairing a pretty lady's barn roof." Clara laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse but good. "Jacob Thorne, you are a scoundrel." "I have been called worse," he said cheerfully. "Now, where do you keep your tools?" Over the following weeks, Jacob became a regular presence at the Brennan homestead. He would arrive each Sunday morning, tools in hand, and spend the day working on the seemingly endless list of repairs that Clara had been unable to tackle herself. He fixed the barn roof, repaired the well pump so that they could reach the deeper water that had not yet dried up, mended fences, and shored up the cabin's foundation. But more than that, he brought life back to the place. Sam followed him around like a devoted puppy, learning how to properly handle tools and care for animals. Jacob, with infinite patience, taught the boy things his father would have taught him if he had lived: how to shoot straight, how to read weather signs, how to gentle a skittish horse. For Daniel, Jacob brought stories and laughter, and sometimes small gifts: a smooth stone from the creek near the ranch, a carved wooden horse, a pocket knife that had been Jacob's own when he was Daniel's age. And for Clara, Jacob brought something more complicated and precious: companionship. They would talk for hours as they worked side by side, Jacob mending a fence while Clara tended the garden they had managed to coax back to life with water from the newly repaired well. They talked about everything and nothing: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their observations about the world. Clara learned that Jacob had a quick mind and a generous spirit, that he noticed small things like the way light fell through leaves or how birds sang differently before a storm. She learned that he had a deep sense of honor and fairness, that he could not stand to see anyone treated unjustly. She learned that despite his years of drifting, he longed for something permanent, though he seemed almost afraid to admit it. Jacob learned that Clara was stronger than she looked, that she had a wry sense of humor that came out when she felt safe enough to let her guard down. He learned that she loved books and had read the same handful of volumes in her possession dozens of times, that she could quote passages from Dickens and Shakespeare from memory. He learned that she sang while she worked, old Irish songs her mother had taught her, her voice clear and sweet in the morning air. As summer faded into fall and the first hints of cooler weather arrived, something unspoken grew between them. It was there in the way Jacob's hand would linger when he passed Clara a tool, in the way Clara's eyes would follow Jacob as he worked, in the charged silence that would fall between them sometimes, heavy with words neither quite dared to speak. Sam noticed, of course. One Sunday evening after Jacob had left, the boy cornered Clara as she washed dishes. "You like him," Sam said. It was not a question. Clara felt her cheeks heat. "He is a good man," she said carefully. "He has been very kind to us." "That is not what I mean, and you know it," Sam said. "You like him. Like how mother liked father." Clara set down the dish she was holding and turned to face her brother. Sam's expression was serious, older than his years. "Would that bother you?" she asked quietly. Sam was silent for a moment, thinking. "I liked things how they were," he said finally. "Just us three making it work. It felt like we were honoring mother and father by staying together, by not needing anyone else." "We will always be together," Clara said. "Nothing will change that." "But if you married him, he would be part of us," Sam said. "Things would be different." "Would that be so terrible?" Clara asked gently. "Having someone to help carry the load? Having a man around who could teach you things, who cares about you and Daniel?" Sam's face worked through several emotions. "He is going to ask you, is he not?" he said. "To marry him?" "I do not know," Clara admitted. "We have not spoken of it." "But Sam, if he did, I think I would say yes, not because I need rescuing, not because I cannot take care of us on my own, but because he makes me happy in a way I did not think I could be happy again, because when he is here, the world feels less heavy, because I want to share my life with him." Sam nodded slowly, his jaw set in that stubborn way that was pure Brennan. "He better be good to you," he said finally, "and to Daniel. If he is not, I will have words with him." Clara pulled her brother into a hug, feeling tears prick her eyes. "When did you grow up?" she whispered. "When I had to," Sam said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. The conversation proved prophetic. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon in October when the air had finally cooled and the first rains in months had blessed the parched earth, Jacob asked Clara to take a walk with him. They followed the creek, which was beginning to flow again, their feet crunching on fallen leaves. Jacob had been quiet all day, and Clara sensed something weighing on him. When they reached a spot where the creek widened into a small pool, he stopped and turned to face her. "Clara?" he began, then paused, seeming to struggle for words. Jacob, who always knew what to say, who could charm anyone with his easy conversation, suddenly looked nervous. It was endearing and terrifying all at once. "I am not a rich man," he said finally. "I have some money saved, enough for a start, but I'm never going to be one of these big ranchers with thousands of head of cattle. I am a working man, and I always will be." "I know that," Clara said, her heart beginning to race. "And I have spent most of my adult life drifting," Jacob continued. "I've never stayed in one place more than a season or two. I have never had a real home." "Jacob, what are you trying to say, Ache?" Clara asked, though she thought she knew, thought she hoped. Jacob took her hands in his calloused palms warm against hers. "I am saying that I want to stop drifting," he said. "I am saying that I have found what I have been looking for, even though I did not know I was looking for it. I am saying that I love you, Clara Brennan. I love your strength and your courage and your kindness. I love the way you sing when you think no one is listening. I love the way you take care of your brothers like they are your own children. I love the way you make me want to be a better man than I am." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Jacob," she whispered. "I do not have much to offer you," Jacob said, "but I can work hard. I can provide for you and Sam and Daniel. I can love you every day for the rest of my life. I can give you a home, a real home with roots." He took a shaky breath. "Clara Brennan, will you marry me?" "Yes," Clara said, the word bursting from her like a prayer. "Yes, yes, yes." Jacob's face broke into a brilliant smile, and then he was kissing her, his arms wrapping around her waist and lifting her off her feet. Clara wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and hope and love that had been building in her for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara was laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you since the day you gave me back my mother's ring. I think maybe I loved you even before that, from the moment you walked into McGilvrey's store and saw me." "I saw you," Jacob confirmed, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I saw you, and I knew my life had just changed forever." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Rocking Horse Ranch, with Mr. Hutchinson officiating in his capacity as Justice of the Peace. Sam stood up as witness, trying to look solemn but unable to hide his smile. Daniel bounced on his toes throughout the ceremony, excited beyond measure at the prospect of having Jacob as a permanent fixture in their lives. Clara wore her best dress, freshly washed and pressed, with her mother's ring on her finger and wildflowers in her hair that Daniel had gathered. Jacob wore a new shirt he had bought in town, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. When they spoke their vows, Clara's voice shook with emotion, but she did not falter. Jacob's voice was strong and sure, his eyes never leaving her face. When it was done, and they were husband and wife, Jacob kissed Clara in front of God and the small gathering of ranch hands and neighbors who had come to celebrate, and Clara felt as though her heart would burst from joy. The newlyweds had to be practical about their arrangements. Jacob could not leave his job at the Rocking Horse, not when they needed every dollar he could earn, and Clara could not abandon the homestead that was their only real asset. So they divided their time, with Jacob staying at the ranch during the week and riding to the Brennan place each weekend. It was not ideal, but they made it work, treasuring their Sundays together and the occasional evening when Jacob could steal away for a few hours. In December, the rains came in earnest, breaking the drought that had strangled the land for so long. The creek swelled to a proper stream, the well overflowed, and the earth turned from brown to green as winter grass pushed up through the mud. It felt like a benediction, a sign that perhaps their luck had truly turned. It was also in December that Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob on Christmas Day as they sat together by the fire in the cabin while Sam and Daniel played with the small gifts Jacob had made for them. A slingshot for Daniel, a proper hunting knife for Sam. Jacob's face went through a rapid series of expressions when she gave him the news: shock, wonder, fierce joy, and then concern. "Are you frightened?" he asked, taking her hand. "Yes," Clara admitted, "but I am happy too. I want this, Jacob. I want a family with you." "We already have a family," Jacob said, squeezing her hand. "But I will confess that the idea of a child who is ours, who is part both of us, fills me with more joy than I knew I could feel." "Then we are agreed," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We are happy and terrified together." Jacob laughed and kissed the top of her head. "That sounds about right." The next months brought changes. Jacob, with Mr. Hutchinson's blessing, began building a small house on a piece of land near the ranch that the rancher had agreed to sell him for a fair price. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs, built with Jacob's own hands and Clara's dreams. The plan was to move there in the spring, combining the income from Jacob's ranch work with the small amount they could make from the homestead, which Sam would take over with Jacob's help. Sam, now 15 and increasingly capable, was eager to prove himself, and Jacob spent hours teaching him everything about working the land and caring for livestock. As winter turned to spring and Clara's belly swelled with their coming child, the house took shape. Jacob worked on it every spare moment, sawing and hammering and lifting, pouring all his love and hope into every board and nail. Clara would visit on Sundays, watching the structure rise from the ground, imagining their life there. "It needs a name," she said one afternoon in April, standing in what would be their main room. "All the good homesteads have names." Jacob considered, his arm around her shoulders. "What about Thornhaven?" he suggested, "a place of thorns and sanctuary, protected but welcoming." Clara smiled. "Thornhaven," she repeated, testing the word. "Yes, that is perfect. That is home." Their son was born on a hot night in late July of 1879, attended by Mr. Hutchinson's wife, Martha, who had experience with such matters, and one of the ranch hands who had once worked as a doctor in St. Louis before circumstances had driven him west. The labor was long and difficult, and Jacob spent the hours pacing outside the small house like a caged animal, praying to any god who would listen to keep his wife safe. When Martha finally emerged and told him he had a healthy son and that Clara was tired but well, Jacob nearly collapsed from relief. He entered the bedroom on shaking legs and found Clara propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a quilt Martha had brought, and when she pulled back the edge of the fabric, Jacob saw his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. As Jacob watched, the infant's eyes opened, revealing a color somewhere between his mother's brown and his father's blue-green. "Hello, little man," Jacob whispered, reaching out one finger to touch the impossibly small hand. The baby's fist closed around Jacob's finger with surprising strength, and Jacob felt something shift inside him, a reordering of priorities and purpose. Everything he had been before this moment seemed like preparation for this, to be a father to this child, a husband to this woman, a man who was finally, completely home. "What should we name him?" Clara asked softly. Jacob thought of his own father, a hard man who had never shown affection or approval. He thought of Clara's father, who had died chasing a dream but had loved his family fiercely. "What was your father's name?" he asked. "Thomas," Clara said. "Thomas Michael Brennan." "Thomas," Jacob said, testing the name. "Thomas Thorne. What do you think?" Clara smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I think it is perfect. Thomas Jacob Thorne." "Thomas Jacob," Jacob echoed. He looked at his wife, his son, and felt a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. "Thank you," he said, "for him, for us, for everything." "Thank you for giving me back my ring," Clara said, reaching for his hand, "for seeing me when I most needed to be seen, for giving me a reason to hope again." They named their son Thomas, and he was baptized in the creek that ran near Thornhaven, with Sam and Daniel standing as godfathers, both brothers having grown close to Jacob and fiercely protective of their nephew. The family divided their time between Thornhaven and the old Brennan homestead, making both properties work, combining their resources and labor. Sam, at 16, was proving to be a natural rancher, and with Jacob's guidance and occasional financial help, he began to slowly improve the old place, buying a few head of cattle when prices dropped, fixing up the barn, planting a proper vegetable garden. Daniel, now 13, split his time between helping Sam and attending the new school that had opened in Redemption Springs as the town began to recover from the drought years. Life was not easy. Jacob worked long hours at the Rocking Horse Ranch, and Clara managed Thornhaven while caring for young Thomas. Money was always tight, and there were setbacks. A dry spell in the summer of 1880 that threatened another drought, a bout of fever that swept through Redemption Springs and laid Jacob low for 2 weeks, a hard winter in 1881 that killed several of Sam's cattle. But they endured. They endured because they had each other, because they had built something worth fighting for. And slowly, so slowly, they almost did not notice at first, they began to prosper. In the spring of 1882, Clara found herself pregnant again, Their daughter, Grace Ellen, was born that November, a small, perfect creature with her mother's dark eyes and her father's easy smile. Thomas, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and would sit for hours watching her, bringing her things he thought she might like: smooth stones, wildflowers, his favorite wooden horse. Sam, now 19, had transformed the Brennan homestead into a working ranch, modest but profitable. He had grown into a capable young man, tall and strong, with his father's determination and his mother's kindness. He courted a girl in town, the daughter of the dry goods merchant, and Jacob and Clara watched with fond amusement as Sam tried to navigate the complex ritual of courtship. Daniel, at 16, had developed a love of learning and a talent for figures. He was working part-time at the bank in Redemption Springs, and the manager had hinted that there might be a full-time position for him when he finished school. Jacob and Clara encouraged this, pleased that at least one member of the family would have a path that did not involve the back-breaking labor of ranch life. As for Jacob and Clara themselves, they settled into a partnership that was equal parts love and practicality. They worked side by side, building their life piece by piece, day by day. Jacob still worked at the Rocking Horse, but he had been promoted to foreman, a position that came with better pay and a small percentage of the profits when cattle sold well. Clara managed Thornhaven, tending their own small herd, growing vegetables that she sold in town, taking in occasional sewing work. But more than the work, what defined their marriage was the quiet moments. The way Jacob would come home exhausted and still make time to play with Thomas and Grace before supper. The way Clara would wait up for him on late nights, ready with hot coffee and a warm smile. The way they would sit on their porch after the children were asleep, holding hands and watching the stars, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing together in companionable silence. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one evening in the summer of 1884 as they sat on that porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dark. Thomas was 5 now, Grace not quite 2. Giving up the drifting life? Settling down? Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously as he always did. "Not once," he said finally, "not for a single moment. That life was fine when I did not know any better, when I thought freedom meant being untethered. But I learned that real freedom is choosing where you belong and who you belong with. I learned that home is not a place you drift to. It is something you build." "We built a good one," Clara said softly, looking at the house behind them. The barn Jacob had constructed, the corrals, the garden. Thornhaven had grown from those 2 rooms and a loft into something substantial. They had added on twice now, once when Grace was born and again just last month, anticipating a future that seemed to stretch out bright before them. "We did," Jacob agreed. "But you know what the best part is?" "What?" "We are not done building yet," Jacob said, squeezing her hand. "There is still so much ahead of us. We will watch Thomas and Grace grow up. We will see Sam get married. We will help Daniel go to college if that is what he wants. We will add more rooms to this house, maybe welcome more children if we are blessed. We will grow old together, you and I, and we will sit on this porch when we are gray and wrinkled and watch our grandchildren play in the yard." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor through all the storms. "Tell me more," she said. "Tell me about that future." And Jacob did, spinning stories into the summer night, stories of years to come, of Christmases and birthdays, of harvest celebrations and quiet winter evenings, of all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life well lived. Clara listened and believed every word because with Jacob she had learned that hope was not foolish, and dreams could come true if you were willing to work for them. The years rolled on, bringing joys and sorrows as years do. In 1885, Sam married his sweetheart Emily in a ceremony at the old Brennan homestead, which was now a proper ranch called the Broken Bee. Clara and Jacob stood up as witnesses, and there was much celebrating and laughter. Sam and Emily would go on to have 4 children, and Sam proved to be as good a father as his own had been and as good a husband as Jacob was to Clara. Daniel did indeed go to college, attending a business school in San Antonio with money that Jacob, Clara, and Sam had all contributed. He returned with ideas about modern banking and land management, and he became an invaluable advisor to both his siblings, helping them navigate the increasingly complex business side of ranching. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother did and had his father's quiet strength. Grace was pure joy, a laughing, fearless child who rode horses before she could barely walk and kept everyone on their toes with her adventurous spirit. In 1887, Clara gave birth to twin boys, James and John, who were mirror images of each other and complete terrors who delighted in causing mischief. Jacob, now in his mid-30s, would chase after them laughing, occasionally catching Clara's eye and shaking his head in bemused wonder at the chaos their life had become. Thornhaven expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and what had started as a simple two-room house now sprawled across the hillside, a testament to the family's growth and prosperity. The ranch itself had grown as well. Jacob had left his position at the Rocking Horse in 1886 to focus full-time on building up their own spread. It was still modest compared to the big outfits, but it was theirs, and it provided comfortably for their needs. The old Brennan homestead, under Sam's capable management, had become one of the more successful small ranches in the area. Sam and Emily lived in the old cabin that had been expanded and improved, raising their family on the same land where Sam had grown up. The two ranches, Thornhaven and the Broken Bee, worked together, sharing resources and labor, a family enterprise in the truest sense. Daniel, based in town but frequently visiting, had married a school teacher named Margaret in 1889, and they lived in a nice house on Main Street in Redemption Springs, which itself had grown and prospered as the region recovered from the drought years. The town now had a proper school, a church, 2 hotels, and a railroad connection that had arrived in 1888, opening up new markets for the ranchers. On a warm evening in May of 1890, the extended family gathered at Thornhaven to celebrate Clara's 34th birthday. The house was full of noise and laughter, Sam's 4 children running wild with Thomas, Grace, and the twins, Emily and Margaret helping Clara prepare a feast, Daniel and Sam talking business on the porch, Jacob keeping watch over the chaos with the contented air of a man who had everything he could possibly want. After supper, as the children played in the yard and the adults sat on the expanded porch enjoying the cool evening air, Sam raised his glass. "A toast," he said. "To Clara, the strongest woman I know. The woman who kept us together when everything was falling apart. Happy birthday, sister." "To Clara," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. She looked around at the faces of the people she loved, her brothers, now grown men with families of their own, her children, healthy and bright, her husband, still as handsome to her eyes as he had been that first day in McGilvrey's store, though his hair was now touched with gray at the temples. "I have a toast as well," Clara said, standing, "to second chances, to the kindness of strangers who become family, to hard work and faith and love that endures." She looked at Jacob, and their eyes met across the porch, and to a cowboy who once bought a ring and gave it back, and in doing so gave me everything. Jacob's eyes glistened as he raised his glass. "To the woman who was worth every penny," he said softly. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Jacob and Clara lay in their bed, the windows open to let in the night breeze. Clara wore her mother's ring on a chain around her neck now, having passed the wearing of it on her finger to Grace for when she was older, wanting to continue the tradition of passing it down through the generations. "Do you ever think about that day?" Clara asked in the darkness. "In McGilvrey's store?" "Every day," Jacob admitted. "I think about how close I came to not going in, to just riding past. I almost did, you know. I had my supplies all ready. I only went in because I heard voices and was curious." "Fate," Clara murmured. "Maybe," Jacob said. "Or maybe just luck. Or maybe the universe knew we needed each other." "We did," Clara said. "We still do." "Always," Jacob agreed, pulling her close. As Clara drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. from desperate poverty and near starvation to this abundance of love and life. From a woman bargaining away her most precious possession for flour to a woman who had everything that mattered. And she thought about Jacob, the drifting cowboy who had walked into a general store and seen not just her desperation, but her worth, who had given back more than a ring, who had given her hope and love and a future. The years continued their steady march, bringing the joys and challenges that fill any life fully lived. By 1895, Thomas was 16 and working the ranch alongside his father, having inherited Jacob's way with horses and Clara's steady determination. Grace, at 13, was already breaking hearts in town. Though she paid the boys little attention, more interested in racing her horse and helping her mother manage the household. The twins, James and John, now 8 years old, attended school in Redemption Springs and were the despair of their teacher, though everyone agreed they were bright boys when they could be convinced to sit still long enough to learn anything. Clara, now nearing 40, was as beautiful as ever to Jacob's eyes, her face marked by laugh lines and the wisdom that comes from years well spent. Jacob himself, at 43, had the weathered look of a man who had spent his life outdoors, but his eyes were still that striking blue-green, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his skin and his life. He had achieved something he had never imagined possible in his drifting days. He was respected in the community, a man known for his fairness and his willingness to help neighbors in need. Sam's Broken Bee Ranch and Jacob's Thorn Haven had become pillars of the local ranching community, examples of what could be achieved through hard work and smart management. Daniel, now a bank manager and part owner of the Redemption Springs First National Bank, had helped both operations secure the credit they needed to expand during good times and weather the storms during bad. But more than business success, what defined the Thorn and Brennan families was their closeness. They gathered frequently, shared resources freely, and supported each other through every trial. The children grew up more as siblings than cousins, and there was genuine affection between all the branches of the family tree. In the spring of 1896, as Clara was hanging laundry in the yard at Thornhaven, she felt a familiar flutter in her belly and paused, her hand going to her stomach. At 40, she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but she recognized this feeling, had experienced it 5 times before. When she told Jacob that evening, his face cycled through surprise, concern, and then joy. "Are you well?" he asked, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "Is this safe? You are not young anymore, Clara?" "Neither are you, old man," Clara teased, but she understood his worry. Childbirth was dangerous at any age, and women older than her had died bringing new life into the world. "I feel strong," she said, "tired sometimes, but strong, and I think this baby, whoever they are, is meant to be here. Why else would we be blessed again?" Their youngest child, a daughter they named Rose Catherine, was born in December of 1896, a perfect Christmas gift. The birth was easier than Clara had feared, and Rose proved to be a contented, peaceful baby, as though she knew she was the caboose on a long train and was determined not to cause trouble. Thomas, now 17, was gentle and protective of his tiny sister. Grace, 15, and on the cusp of womanhood, took to carrying Rose around and practicing her mothering skills. Even the twins, notorious for their wild ways, would quiet down when holding the baby, their faces softening into tenderness. As the new century approached, the Thorne family found itself in a position Clara could never have imagined during those desperate drought years. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were prosperous and secure. The ranch supported them comfortably, the children were all healthy and thriving, and Jacob and Clara's love had only deepened with time. On the last day of December 1899, as the old century prepared to give way to the new, Jacob and Clara stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. Behind them, the house was full of family, Sam and Emily with their 4 children, Daniel and Margaret with their 2, and all of Jacob and Clara's brood. 21 years, Clara said softly. 21 years since you walked into McGilvrey's store. "Best decision I ever made," Jacob said, his arm around her waist. "Going into that store, buying that ring, giving it back to you." Clara reached up to touch the chain around her neck, where her mother's ring still hung. She had given it to Grace just last month, on her daughter's 16th birthday, continuing the tradition. Grace wore it with pride, understanding the history behind it, the weight of love and sacrifice it represented. "Do you think we have done well?" Clara asked. "Do you think we have built something good?" Jacob looked through the window at the family gathered inside, children and grandchildren, siblings and spouses, all talking and laughing, filling the house with warmth and life. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that desperate day in a dusty general store to this moment of contentment and abundance. "I think we have built something remarkable," he said. "Not because we are rich or famous, but because we built it together with love and work and faith. We built a family, Clara. We built a home. We built a life. That is more than most people ever achieve." Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I would not change a thing," she whispered. "Not one single moment, even the hard times, because they led us here." "To this moment," Jacob agreed, "to this life." As the last light faded from the sky and the new century waited just hours away, Jacob and Clara Thorne stood together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, and knew themselves to be blessed beyond measure. They had started with nothing but hope and a returned ring, and they had built an empire of love. Inside, someone started playing the piano, and voices rose in song, welcoming the new century with music and joy. Jacob took Clara's hand and led her inside, into the warmth and light, into the celebration of all they had built together. And as they danced in their living room surrounded by everyone they loved, Clara caught Jacob's eye and smiled. He smiled back, that same smile that had first captured her heart 21 years ago. And Clara knew with absolute certainty that she would spend the rest of her days loving this man who had seen her at her lowest moment and chosen to lift her up, who had given back what she tried to sacrifice and, in doing so, had given her the world. Their story, begun in desperation and transformed by kindness, had become the foundation for generations to come. The ring would pass down through Clara's line, carried by daughters and granddaughters, each one learning the story of how a cowboy bought it from a shopkeeper and gave it back to a desperate young woman, and how that single act of compassion had changed everything. Years later, when Jacob and Clara were old and gray, sitting on that same porch watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the yard of Thornhaven, they would tell that story again. And each time, it would end the same way, with two people who found each other at precisely the right moment, who chose love when the world offered hardship, and who built something beautiful from the ashes of despair. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the ages as a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of true love. And in the telling and retelling, the story became more than just their history. It became a promise that hope exists even in the darkest moments, that kindness can change lives, and that love, when tended with care and commitment, can bloom even in the harshest soil and endure through all the seasons of a life well lived.